it's my sincere pleasure to welcome you all today. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our seasoned sponsors who make programming at Exec Club possible, as well as the spotlight sponsors of today's program, Energy BBDO, Merrill, and NiSource. A few quick technical notes. You can submit questions for our panel using the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. Also, you can access the Facts and Questions tab above the video player on your screen with tips and recommendations for optimal viewing. For all troubleshooting questions, please email programs@executivesclub.org and members of the team are on standby to assist. In addition to today's program, I invite you all to join us for other upcoming events at the club, both virtual and in person. We have a lot of exciting content to share with you this spring. Visit executivesclub.org for more information and opportunities to engage. So on to our program for today. Employees and future leaders of Chicago and beyond are looking for workplaces that support a fair life balance. I look forward to today's dialogue that will explore the road to paid family leave, the progress that has been made so far, the current legislation to establish equitable policies, and the vital corporate response needed to create a culture that supports caregiving. We have an expert panel joining us today to discuss this incredibly important and timely topic. DeHaas, Chief Executive Officer of the Corporate Leadership Center, Ai-jen Poo, Co-founder and Executive Director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and Tchen, Principal of Seneca Strategies. Please join me in welcoming Hilary Bochniak, Managing Director of Human Resources at Accenture and the moderator for today's program. Over to you, Hilary.
Thank you so much, Margaret. It is such an honor to be among this group of amazing women who have brought their wealth of experience across both public and private sector, their considerable talents, their big brains, and their strong voices to call attention to this really important topic. Thought maybe we would start with, with a little bit of context, a little bit of history. Next year, the FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, will turn 30. And of course, the FMLA requires employers of a certain size to provide protected leave for individuals for certain family and medical circumstances, but that leave is unpaid. Maybe Tina, you could start us off. Can you talk a little bit about why paid leave is so important and the nuance there?
Well, thank you, Hilary. And I want to thank Margaret for putting this together because it's so incredibly timely. And this is a topic that I think we just see it from the data that more and more families are experiencing the challenges of caregiving and balancing work and either having to opt out of the workforce or figure it out. And you're right to put it in the context of the Family Medical Leave Act, the FMLA, because that was a challenge to get that passed. And I remember being in the White House when it turned 20 and we had a big celebration. And President Clinton said that it was one of the things he was the most proud of during his entire 8 years was to get unpaid guaranteed leave passed. But unpaid means you don't get wages unless your employer is stepping up to voluntarily provide you and supplement the wages that you've lost. And so many workers, especially low-wage workers, can't afford that time, right? Can't afford to lose a paycheck for several weeks, for let alone months at a time of what people need. And so that's the struggle that we're in. And let me just put it in a global context, Hilary. We are, one of the few countries in the world, literally the only industrialized country in the world that does not have a national form of paid leave in some fashion. Even places like Saudi Arabia have some form of paid maternity leave for new mothers. We don't have any of that at the national level. And we are way behind our global competitors. For global companies like yours, it's a real challenge because your American workers do not have the same protections as others. And it really is time where we need to, in this country, move forward and join the rest of the world in making the lives for our workers better.
Thank you. Ai-jen, you gave an amazing TED Talk a couple of years ago about work that makes all other work possible. And one of the themes that you touched on there was that whilst childcare is certainly important, it's a bigger conversation than that. Can you talk to us a little bit about family leave, not just parental leave, and how you see those things coming together?
Well, we're living in a really unique time in this country where there's a major demographic shift happening. And it's not the one that you think. It's not the racial demographic shift. I mean, that's also happening. But what we have is the baby boom generation aging into retirement at a rate of 10,000 people turning 65 every single day, and also living longer than ever before because of advances in healthcare and technology. We are living on average about 20 years longer than when we first started building our social safety net. And so we've basically added a whole generation onto our lifespan in this country without adapting any of our policies, our programs, our culture to really support a quality of life for a longer lifespan. And that has huge implications. And mainly what it's meant is that women who are working in the workforce are also holding the responsibility of caring for aging loved ones with disabilities. And that is on top of millennials also having about 4 million babies per year. And so millennials having families of their own, and it's creating this pressure. Some people call it the sandwich generation.
Right.
I call it, sandwich seems like too gentle a metaphor for me. So I call it the panini effect, because you're just kind of pressured, be squeezed between the pressures of childcare and elder care on both sides of the generational spectrum. And it's just so much, especially for working women who are managing both to try to figure out how to navigate it all. There really isn't support in place. What we have is a workforce of underpaid, undervalued care workers who we count on to show up to take care of our kids, to take care of our aging parents or loved ones with disabilities. And the whole thing is just a house of cards. And I think most of us felt a version of that during the pandemic, where we were all kind of navigating these extraordinary, unreal care crises amidst it all. And for the care workers that I work with every day, there is no paid leave. There isn't even unpaid leave. You're working paycheck to paycheck. 82% of domestic workers, like nannies, didn't have a single paid sick day going into the pandemic. 90% of them lost all of their jobs and income overnight. So there's just a lot of insecurity out there, especially among women, and especially among women who we're counting on to take care of us.
I know that the three of you have crossed paths a lot and are often speaking on same topics and working together. And Tina, you have written that caregiving isn't a personal issue to be solved by the individual, because in fact, businesses and economies are bearing the cost of the caregiver crisis that Ai-jen just described. Deb, as somebody who has spent considerable amount of your career in the corporate space, and particularly in the context of the significant role that you played at Deloitte, championing inclusion in leadership, can you talk a little bit about that from the perspective of a large global employer?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a pleasure to be with all of you on such an important topic. Maybe just to add on to something that Ai-jen said that I thought was really interesting, I'm going to reference actually a BCG survey that came out. It occurred in July of 2021. It covered a global employee set, of which about 40% had caregiving responsibilities and about 60% did not. And I thought this was very interesting to your points earlier. Caregivers were 1.4 times more likely to say they were worried about their futures at work and their overall well-being. And in the US, caregiving employees were over 2 times as likely to feel that their ability to perform has decreased during the pandemic in particular. So, this issue is incredibly important. And I know, Ai-jen, even though I'm an older leader, more senior leader, I'm involved in caregiving for my 93-year-old father. I'm his primary caregiver. So I'm feeling, having been a working parent and and now doing the elder care thing, how challenging it is. But I do think, Hillary, to your point, this is an issue that every company that I'm involved with right now is grappling with. The war for talent is huge, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about this later on, but I do think, Tina, to your point, the U.S. is clearly in a different place with many other markets, and I know we'll talk about what we think some of the opportunities are for future progress, but I'm optimistic about a lot of the changes that have occurred, and happy to talk a little bit later on about how we accomplished some of the things we did at Deloitte. But I think this is a moment where companies have a huge opportunity to be creative and to really lead with not only leave programs, but also the suite of other programs and benefits that caregivers need to be effective in their jobs.
I mean, one of the things that I've been struck by thinking about this topic and talking to all of you is the disproportionate impact on women, and especially women of color, which of course then has a massive setback in terms of equality, in terms of inclusion and diversity. And then that then has a knock-on effect in terms of setting us back with respect to innovation, because it's diversity that drives innovation. In light of the struggles that we're having to progress this issue at the federal level, I'd be interested in, maybe Tina, you could give us some thoughts around progress that you're seeing and or the balance between federal and action at the state level, in addition to the corporate and private sector interventions that we're going to talk more about.
No, absolutely. And Deb's right. And, she and I have been, through this for years, getting companies, my own profession, the law profession, law firms, actually had some form of parental leave in place for now quite a while. But that really is only affecting a slice of the workforce, right? And in particular, I think folks at the top end of the wage scale are over 7 times more likely to have paid leave than workers at the bottom of the wage scale. And so you're right, Hillary. I mean, that's where the burden is falling, which is why we need some form of government paid leave policies. And I want to be really clear when we talk about that, it is sometimes there's a misnomer that it's like an unfunded mandate, right? That we're trying to force companies to provide it and small business owners get worried. It's the reverse. It is actually something that will help those small businesses, those companies that, for example, aren't tech companies or aren't financial services companies who can't afford to provide paid leave on their own for their workers, are competing in that war for talent right now that Deb talked about, and are losing out because they actually can't provide this needed benefit. And so we know, and this has actually now been working in 9 states already that have passed paid leave. And we just added this last week, Maryland and Delaware as the 10th and the 11th states to adopt their own form of paid leave. And it works like UI insurance, right? It works like a, paycheck, a check off to have people, and we're talking about 1% of someone's salary to go into a fund to help provide then funds for those small business owners, for other companies, to offset, provide their wage replenishment for providing paid leave to their workers. So this is actually something that will enable small businesses to compete, will provide universal coverage for all the workers who need to have this kind of leave. And so I remain optimistic. I mean, we got close, and we are getting closer, as Ai-jen knows, at the federal level on an understanding of this. And in the meantime, as we have in our wonderful federal system, the states are experimenting and are showing the way. And we have a track record that shows that it works. In places like California that have now had it for years, this data shows businesses are not fleeing California. Small business owners are actually, the surveys tell us they are highly supportive of this as a program. And so I remain optimistic that as people learn more about what a paid leave program really is, they will understand how it will benefit small business owners. It will benefit workers, and it's going to benefit our overall economy. We're talking about $1.3 billion of earnings power that can be added into the economy if we have a national paid leave program.
In addition to the governmental interventions, any of you who feel like jumping in on this would be great. Do you feel like we are reaching a tipping point where companies can really appreciate this as a benefit to them because of the war for talent versus purely a cost? And where you're seeing change, do you attribute it to sort of a breaking through the old paradigm, or is it more a function of the fact that employees are demanding it?
Well, I'll jump in quickly. I mean, I think it's both, right? I think it was referenced earlier, there had been, I think, a building momentum on things like paid leave. But I think the pandemic actually really pushed it over, in multiple ways. First, it was this now, how do you get your workers back as we come out of the pandemic? During the pandemic, I will tell you, I think business leaders, CEOs, experienced the that crush, the panini effect that Ai-jen talked about in ways they never had before. They were on Zoom calls with their employees, watching kids run in the background, right? Watching somebody have to leave a Zoom call to care for somebody, in another room of the house who was sick or elderly. They were experiencing it themselves. This was not a moment where CEOs could just leave the house at 8 a.m. in the morning and be oblivious to what was going on all day in the household. And so I do think there was a visceral experience that so many business leaders had this last 2 years that have made them understand this in a way that we never had before.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tina. I do think it's both. I'm going to quote another set of research. This is from Paramount Research, which was formerly Working Mother Media. They recently did some work, and they identified that 79% of mothers and 61% of fathers felt that an expansion of their childcare related benefits would be either a very or extremely important factor in their effectiveness at work. And they also identified that close to 5 million US adults were not seeking employment because they were caring for a child who didn't attend school or daycare. So I think it's coming from both directions. I think companies are having a very difficult time finding qualified employees. We've all heard about the great resignation. I also feel they're hearing from their employees how important it is. And I know we were talking about this earlier, Tina, I totally agree. I think seeing this glimpse into people's lives and seeing the challenges of parents during the pandemic who were caregiving and coaching their children through their own technology issues as they were trying to progress with their educational efforts. And I think then just people feeling that in this pandemic, it's been much more difficult to sort of turn off from work. I think many companies have experienced that the productivity has been, frankly, amazing during the pandemic, which has been a good thing in many respects because it's certainly kept our economy very robust. But I think we are at this moment as companies are bringing their employees back to whatever the sort of the future of work looks like in their organization. And I really do think it's a moment for companies to step up and lead. And most of the organizations that I'm involved with, this is sort of top of mind topics. This is the talent imperative is in boardrooms, I think, in a way that it hasn't been, at least in my career. And again, so I think there's been a lot of progress, but I think we have an opportunity for both companies to lead. And Tina, it's great to hear that you think there's still continued opportunities with legislative mandates.
Well, I do, Deb. And one of the things I would say to this audience is I think it's time for the business leaders in our community to raise their voices in support of, both national and even here in Illinois, we could do a paid leave program. And because it will benefit businesses, like I said, I think there is a misunderstanding that this would somehow actually be a burden when in fact it would benefit so many businesses to be able to have, a paid leave fund, that the government operates that is, as I said, cents on the dollar, contribution by employees, and employers into the fund, and then be able to provide this benefit to everyone. And I think, business leaders need to step up as well as the advocates and caregiving advocates to speak out for this.
So I think about some of the system design aspects of it. So legislating leave and policies and programs that companies are able to put into place. And then you juxtapose that with then seeing the spirit in practice and the cultural acceptance. Ai-jen, can you give us some perspective in terms of how you're seeing that shift?
Well, I think politically, I think culturally, the pandemic really helped us make a shift from seeing caregiving as kind of an individual responsibility and burden, and if we can't figure it out, an individual personal failure, right? So many of us, I think, felt like if we struggled to manage childcare and elder care, that we were either a bad parent, or we have the wrong job, or we forgot, we didn't buy the right insurance, or whatever the situation is. And I think the pandemic helped us collectively see that we can be doing the very best we can and doing everything right, and absent a larger infrastructure, system, workforce in place, it's impossible. People are forced to make impossible choices. And in April and May of 2020 alone, 4 million women were pushed out of the workforce in 2 months because of caregiving challenges. And so we have the data, and I think people have the visceral experience, to Tina's earlier point, of the pandemic that's helped us to make a bit of a cultural shift. And then on the policy level, it's kind of amazing how far we've come in that, the President of the United States made caregiving policies one of the core pillars of his economic policy, not his women's agenda, not his family or aging agenda. It was the economic agenda, one of the core pillars. And the administration has been approaching this very holistically. They've been talking about paid leave and childcare and long-term care, and thinking about what families need in a holistic way. And so members of Congress are starting to do that as well. Usually these issues are very siloed, and advocates are coming together and breaking down the silos. But I still think that there's this piece where the private sector can play such a huge role, which is to model both in company practices, but also leveraging the bully pulpits that CEOs have to really talk about how in the 21st century, it is really not viable to lead an equitable organization that doesn't have some of these policies, right? And the one other thing I'll quickly add is that my friend Franklin Leonard often talks about the genius of the film Hidden Figures. I don't know how many of you have seen this film, but it's about the Black women in NASA who took us to the moon. And in the film, it really depicts every structural barrier these women faced, racial and gender-based barriers. And I would say the absence of paid leave is one of those types of barriers to women actually being successful. Despite those barriers, those women, those Black women in NASA took us to the moon. Imagine if we had policies that actually supported women of color, to be able to be fully present and offer our full potential to companies, to solving problems, to the future. And I mean, he says we'd all be flying around in carbon neutral jetpacks if we had some of these policies in place and we didn't have these obstacles. And that's what, to me, the meaning, the significance is. It's kind of like getting all of us lined up across government, the nonprofit sector, and the private sector to make that cultural and policy leap towards the 21st century.
That's such a great example. And as we think about the private sector and engagement by particularly large corporations, Deb, maybe you could reflect for us a little bit on the progress that you bore witness to in a very front seat fashion at your former employer at Deloitte, and then perhaps maybe share also some perspective around other companies that you see that are doing it right, especially in Illinois and Chicago.
Yeah, that would be great, Hillary. So I was really proud and honored to serve as Deloitte's first Chief Inclusion Officer. And in the 2015-2016 timeframe, we had elected our first woman CEO, Kathy Engelbert, who's now the commissioner of the WNBA, so continuing her good work. But Kathy really challenged us on her leadership team, and particularly the talent leadership team, to think about Deloitte had always been very proud of being a leader and advancing women and diversity, but what else could or should we be doing? So Tina, you may remember we brought together a group of Deloitte leaders, but we also brought in some outside voices. And we gathered in DC and we spent about a day and a half sort of brainstorming about some different ideas. And one that emerged from that was very exciting. I remember we had Sue Schellenberger, who was at the Wall Street Journal. She wrote for many years about work and family. And she really challenged us to think about family leave, and that could be a huge game changer for Deloitte if we were able to take that on. So we did a lot of research. We had certainly policies that allowed for maternity leave and paternity leave. We didn't really call it that. It was sort of primary caregiver, secondary caregiver. It was a little, I think, challenging and confusing for our people. We did a lot of research. Frankly, it was a little bit hard to look at cost and benefit. But one thing we did know is that amongst our employees, we saw the greatest turnover of people who came back, men and women, from the birth of a child in the first year. That was a large turnover period for us. So we came up with and announced in September of 2016 our family leave program, which really allowed for 16 paid weeks of family leave on a rolling, sort of 365-day calendar that could be taken in increments. So what was really groundbreaking about that, I think there were a couple things. One is it certainly addressed the leave issue for parents, women and men who were having children. And it became very commonplace that with short-term disability and other aspects that many of our women were in fact taking 6 months off, 24 weeks off when they had the birth of the child. And so what we did see, which I think isn't always thought about, is that, women were taking significant leave. That was very impactful for them. But we saw the percentage of our men who were taking a significant amount of leave at the time of a birth of a child, more than double. They weren't necessarily taking the full 16 weeks, but it went up dramatically. So, I think that was very impactful and somewhat leveling, the playing field for our employees, for our men and women, because now men were also taking leaves. And we really saw it become supported very much culturally. In fact, we did a survey about a year in, and I love this statistic. 92% of our people who took the leave said they felt very supported by the firm. Of course, I wanted to know, what happened with the 8%, but the 92% was really quite a remarkable number. I think the other thing that was very noteworthy about the family leave is it really then applied to a much broader percentage of our population. And I can't tell you how many emails I got, bittersweet ones for sure, but of someone who was able to take the time to be with a parent at the end of their life or a spouse. And it really was a game changer for our organization. So there aren't as many companies that have taken this family leave approach. So I'd certainly encourage organizations to think about that. But what I have been encouraged by, Hillary, to your point, is I think there's a number of companies who are making progress, certainly on parental leave and making it be equally available to both partners who might be experiencing the birth or adoption of a child. Certainly, I think the consulting accounting firms have been out in front on this. I think it's been somewhat easier for those organizations to support this because of the nature of their work, as have many of the tech companies and financial services companies. But just two that I'll highlight in the Chicago area that are much more of sort of manufacturing distribution types of organizations are both AbbVie and Grainger. And both have provided, I think, very robust programs that have aspects of both paid and unpaid leave with, sort of a guarantee of a role type of thing. In fact, Grainger just released a new parental policy as of January 1st of 2022. So I think, and it expanded the benefits available. So I do think there are great companies in Chicago. There's many others I could name as well. And I think we're going to continue to see this progression. I'm very hopeful.
I wanted to just quickly chime in and say that I'm so glad that Deb talked about the need to have it be more than parental leave, because there are about 52 million working family caregivers who are caring for an elderly loved one or a loved one with a disability. And those are people who need these policies and are a huge part of our workforce. And so just thinking about inclusive family leave policy is really, really important. And the thing that really gives me hope is if we think about the generations that are directly affected here, the baby boom generation that's caring for aging parents, and millennials who are having babies, and then all of us who are sandwiched in between. I mean, these are very powerful culture driving generations. I mean, the boomers gave us rock and roll and social justice, so they can actually change the way we handle caregiving and support caregivers in the workplace. And combined with millennials, it's unstoppable. So I think it's a great, there's definitely hope, and with companies like Deloitte and others leading the way, we have some great models.
I would be remiss if I didn't say I'm very proud also to work for a company that is progressive in this space, as you say, Deb, in the consulting industry overall. I think we've been fortunate to be able to be out in front. But my Accenture peeps would be very upset if I just handed the mic to Deloitte. We've had
absolutely. Accenture's been amazing. Very proud of all of our cohort of companies that are doing wonderful things.
We've had some great questions come in from our audience who are obviously super engaged on the topic and with all the insights that you all are providing for us. One of the specific questions that has come in has asked, what in your experience has been the most effective way for the individual to advocate for these changes, both in terms of engaging with government, but also in terms of within their own companies? What have you seen that's been effective in helping for the one person to pick up the cause? Ai-jen, do you have a?
I would say there's nothing more powerful than personal storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Each of us has a story about care, and for us to be able to share it, that storytelling in and of itself starts to change the culture, right? It starts to normalize the conversation about caregiving in the economy. And whether it's when you're calling your member of Congress or setting up a meeting with a senator or meeting with your supervisor, being able to share the personal impact that some of these policies could have in your life, there's just nothing more powerful.
I would also say we're at a moment right now, right, where more than any other time that I've been working on this issue for a very long time, where there is this external data and there's external conversation. I mean, this is, happening, on, every, Wall Street Journal's writing about it. The New York Times business section is writing about it. I mean, this is an opportunity for that employee to not only tell their personal story, which I agree with Ai-jen is really powerful, but to be backed up by, making sure their business leader knows they're not alone, right? You could join the ranks of Accenture and Deloitte. You could, be at the forefront. And there's all this external chorus now backing that up that we really didn't have before. So I think it's a great opportunity right now for workers to use their voice.
And Tina, you shared earlier some of the comparative statistics around the United States versus other countries in the world, which are, they're stark and frankly pretty depressing. To what do you attribute the difference? And how does this moment in time, because I was very struck by your recent writing around Care Can't Wait, how does that figure into the optimal timing of now to really focus on this issue?
So the thing here in the United States is we have a long legacy in our culture, if we're talking about culture shift, where we just think care gets provided for free. Whether it, goes all the way back to slavery, where caregiving was provided, that was not something it was unpaid labor. You move forward into the New Deal, and caregivers were specifically left out of the New Deal protections, right? They did not benefit from all the labor protections that were enacted then and exist. And Ai-jen and the folks at the National Domestic Workers Alliance know this. Caregivers are outside of the protections that the rest of us have as workers. Because again, it was viewed not as work that should be paid for or compensated. It was work that women just did in the home. Come forward to the Nixon era. And we actually had a moment in time where Congress passed a national childcare program, and President Nixon vetoed it because it was viewed as the Sovietization of American culture. It was viewed as something the Soviets did to pay for childcare, not something that we should do here. So we've been bucking up against that trend in the United States now for generations, where this hasn't been the kind of work that is viewed as something that people should be compensated for and care for. It was, as Ai-jen said earlier, viewed as this is your personal problem. And workers themselves, when I was in the White House during the last Great Recession, the survey research we had at the time, when I was trying to push for, putting paid leave on the agenda, was workers at the time just wanted a job. They viewed this as a personal issue that they were themselves supposed to face, and solve on their own. And that has shifted dramatically in the last decade, where now we actually do understand that this is not a personal issue. It's not a personal failing, that companies are stepping up and realizing they need to provide it for their workers. And increasingly, now we've got like 11 out of the 50 states, but increasingly more, I think people in the public policy realm are seeing this is something that we will need. And we're going to need it to be, globally competitive, because if we keep doing this, let's be clear, if we keep doing this without having paid leave, we are losing all those millions of workers out of the workforce, their talent. Our companies who do provide paid leave are having to subsidize it their own rather than having a national paid leave program that will help them. So that's putting them at a bottom line disadvantage to global competitors. So, we are going to lose out in that global war for talent and global war for, efficiency and sustainability. And look, if the last 2 years taught us anything, we also need this to be resilient. We entered this pandemic as the only, industrialized country without paid leave. We did not even at the time have a national sick leave policy. And even the sick leave policies we have now nationally are temporary. So 160 million workers entered the pandemic without even the ability to take a day off when they're sick. And that's how we entered the pandemic. We can't do that again, right? Just from, it will not be sustainable to hit the next healthcare crisis without even having sick leave for our workers. So those are all just, for me at the moment, incredibly compelling reasons why we've got to keep moving forward on this issue.
Well, and Tina, I think too, we're at this moment right now, but, and this is where, you referred to the demographics earlier. Some great news is that, now the majority of women, participate in the labor force, and in 41% of families, the mother is either the sole or the main breadwinner. And when you look at just the demographics of who's attending college, women are much more likely now to attain a college degree than men. I think it is one of the crises we need to, frankly, really focus on in our country. So, this progression of women being in these very important roles in their families, in the workforce is only going to continue. And the reality is that, you know, most parents with young children now require childcare services outside of their home. And it's a different world than it was before. And so we need this. I'm a big believer. Yes, the paid leave is so important, but it's a collective set of programs and benefits that are going to be very important. I will say last, I think the other thing we've seen during the pandemic, as it's hard to find workers to do a lot of different things, you know, the options for daycare and other caregiving have become more limited as well. So all of those things are creating challenges, I think, and a lot of stress for employees right now.
I'll just also add there that this is one of the reasons why the frame of infrastructure is so important to us is, you know, I think we all collectively assume that we should be collectively contributing to building and maintaining infrastructure like roads and bridges and airports and you know, I think Senator Casey said it best when he said that, you know, some of us need a bridge or a tunnel to get to work, and others of us need childcare or home care, and that in some ways it is the work that needs to happen or be accounted for in order for caregivers to actually participate in the workforce. And if that infrastructure isn't secure, then everything else is a lot less sustainable and secure. And I think thinking about it in the way that we think about infrastructure is also really helpful in that way, because we do need to update our programs, just like we need to maintain our bridges and tunnels. And we need to strengthen the workforce in particular. And there's a lot that's been in the media about labor shortages in the childcare sector and in the home care sector. And I would argue that it's less that we have a labor shortage, but more that we have a shortage of good paying jobs in those sectors. And if we improve the quality of care jobs, we would not have a problem, I don't think. But right now the numbers don't add up when most care workers are also those primary income earners for their families and have families of their own, and the money that they make is not enough to pay for the childcare that they need to go to work, then it's just, right, it's not possible for them to return. And so all of this is connected. And one of the reasons why I do believe that there's an important role for government here, and a way in which the private sector can really help us get to the next level in this conversation.
Each of you has been so effective in your comments today in terms of bringing data to the conversation. I'd be really interested to understand, where would you point people who are interested in continuing to educate themselves about the facts of the situation? Where do you all go for your data, for your information, and where would you recommend others?
AARP has great data about aging and family caregiving for aging family members. PHI is a think tank that focuses on home and community-based care for people with disabilities and older adults. And then the National Women's Law Center and the National Partnership for Women and Families also have great data, especially about childcare and paid leave. Who am I missing, Tina?
So I would add Center for New America. So Vicki Shabo in particular at the Center for New America has done a lot of research, has put it out on the web and researched, especially all of this activity at the state level, a lot of the data around the financial impact of paid leave in particular. And Center for American Progress, has a lot of research papers, especially on things like, for example, what Deb just referred to as the childcare desert. They're who I got the statistic that, as we entered the pandemic, 50% of the country lived in what we would call a childcare desert, meaning there wasn't any childcare available, right, in where they lived. So that is that infrastructure problem and that holistic approach that both Deb and Ai-jen have referred to.
Yeah. Yeah, and Hillary, I might just add on. I mean, I referenced, BCG, McKinsey, Accenture, Deloitte. Lots of the consulting firms are doing work in this area, surveying, particularly around how employees feel and their issues, et cetera. I think that's very powerful. And then, of course, groups like HRMAC and SHRM are also, I think, have a lot of really good workforce-related information out there as well. So I think there's lots of data now. It's sort of taking it, I think, for organizations and sort of internalizing it and figuring out, what's going to make sense for that organization and how do they continue to, to progress. I really hope there continues to be some really innovative solutions here. Tina, to your point, I mean, I just recall when the pandemic hit, I know many organizations had some of these backup childcare options, right? Well, guess what? None of those were available as backup providers. So, one interesting approach that I saw during that time frame was allowing employees to actually leverage that benefit to compensate a family member who was sort of in that inner circle to provide childcare, so that the other individuals who needed to work could do that. And so that might have been, a grandmother or a sister. And I thought that was incredibly effective, and it was solving a problem at that time. And I just think we need to think about those types of programs, be more willing to innovate, to pilot, and to think differently as we go forward.
No, this is like a whole other topic, Hillary, that we could go into. But I think caregiving, in its broadest definition, is an industry that has been underinvested in, has huge demand, has an enormous opportunity for innovation. Some of that is happening. So Pivotal Ventures did a report last year that sized the care economy. So between childcare, elder care, and also care includes like what we all spend to like maintain our houses, right? When you include all of that, it's a $640 billion industry today, right? That is bigger than the pharmaceutical industry, right? By like 140 billion. So, it is a huge potential growth sector in addition to being this service that we're all talking about and needing. And I think there's opportunity there that's starting to happen with, tech solutions and other kinds of ways to come and solve and address these issues. And that's another challenge that I look forward to, that I think that there are ways to come into an industry like this where there's huge demand, highly disaggregated supply, right? It is ripe for disruptor and new innovative ways to address these issues.
Deb, I think one final for you, perhaps. I know that you've been a leader in conversations, particularly in CHRO circles, around workplaces that work for everyone. In addition to some of the points that you've already made and the need to marry the paid leave topic with other benefits and provisions, what other message would you leave us with on that topic, or key themes that you've explored?
Yeah, I mean, I really think, again, we've anchored this conversation today around family leave or parental leave. It is paid leave. That typically happens at a moment, right? And I always thought about this phrase, moments that matter in people's lives. People remember those moments. And when an organization is there to support you in those moments, either they're very happy or they're very challenging or they're very tragic and sad, those are ways to, create relationships for life. And so I don't want to take away from the importance of that. And it's a game changer. It changes people's lives when they have access to that. I have personal stories from people I know that could not have done certain things without that. But I think it really is going to be the other things around it. It's going to be allowing more flexibility in how and where people work. It's going to create environments where, as those choices are being made by employees, that they're supported, and that that those choices that are being made are not being seen as impeding progress and achieving more long-term career success. So I'm optimistic. I think this is a moment that matters for employers everywhere to get the right talent and to keep them. And I just look forward to us all kind of sharing and helping each other, because I think this is a place where all boats can rise. And I'd love to see the CHROs that I know that I think are sharing actively continue that approach and help us all get better at this moment that is so critical to the future of our economy and to our country.
Thank you. Ai-jen, closing comment, thought from you?
I'll just chime in right behind Deb to say this is our moment. This is literally a once in a generation opportunity where we know that we need to attract and retain talent. We know what women and caregivers have to offer our workforces. We have legislators who are also parents and caregivers who are starting to realize that they need to legislate some solutions here. I mean, we're kind of in a generational accelerated change moment. And if we treat it as an all hands on deck moment, I do believe that we can make the impossible inevitable.
And last but not least, Tina, I know this whole topic was your brainchild to begin with, and it has been so powerful to hear your thoughts on care as infrastructure. And again, I would commend everybody to read your piece around Care Can't Wait. Final point from you, please.
Well, first of all, I am grateful to the Executives Club and for putting this on, because I do think it's a topic that, if it isn't touching your life yet, it will, right? At some point, to Deb's point, there's going to be a moment, whether it's a parent or it's a spouse or you have a child, inevitably in the course of your work-life career, it's going to come. And that's power too, because we all can relate in some level. And I think, there are tools, my message to the audience would be, there are tools out there that we've talked about to learn more about it, to advocate for yourself and for your company, and to know that you're not alone in doing that. Because this is a point in time where you will benefit your company by speaking up in addition to benefiting yourself. The data shows that. We've got experience that shows that. And I am optimistic that this is a transformational moment that we've all talked about, where we can really shift the way work is organized. I say often, look, work is organized still today in the United States the same way it was organized in the Industrial Revolution. That's now not just a century ago, that's like 2 centuries ago. And it is time to modernize. And I think this particular moment in time gives us that opportunity to reimagine work. This is a critical piece of how we reimagine work in a way that's going to benefit everyone.
That's a perfect note on which to end. As we say at Accenture, let there be change. And thank you all for the work that each of you are doing to take this forward. Again, it's been an honor to spend time with you this morning. Thanks again.
Thanks, Hillary.